Good evening, my beautiful people across the UK, across Europe, across Americas, and across Africa, and everywhere our Nigerian diaspora is watching from us. We sincerely apologize for that technical glitch we had. It's something beyond our control, so we had to, quickly get our technical team to see what they can do. So please, apologies for that. We are just going to please help us share this new link with your contacts everywhere so that they can join this live stream. Once again, we welcome you to a very special edition NCCP Christmas bonus episode 2025 edition. As we round off the year, we wanted to give you something meaningful, something relevant, something very Nigerian, and what Nigerian families abroad can relate to. So tonight's topic is a conversation about many parents and what they struggle with silently in the UK or in diaspora generally, which is raising Nigerian children in a Western world, balancing culture, discipline, and love across two different realities, which means our values, our culture, our style of discipline, even our understanding of respect, everything is tested once we enter the Western environment. So many parents find themselves stuck between how I was raised and what is acceptable wherever they are or find themselves in the diaspora. So tonight, we are going to unpack that together. So now, let's introduce our guest. He has spent almost 3 decades working with families, young people, and parents in conflict. He is a parenting consultant, a co-parent coach, an accredited mediator, a systemic family therapy practitioner, and the founder of United in Separation, supporting families in crisis across the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, NCCP family, please help me welcome my brother, our guest for today, Mr. Chris Kolade.
Well, thank
Chris,
you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. And good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm happy
Thank you very much, Chris. Before we open the lines for calls and comments later on, we'll begin with a few foundational questions to set the stage for this important conversation. So, Chris, let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
What, in your experience, are the biggest differences between Nigerian parenting and Western parenting, especially here in the UK? Why do these differences create so much tension, for families living in the diaspora?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very important question, and I think a lot of parents always, try to always find answers, to that. But in my experience, I think the biggest difference between Nigerian parenting and Western world parenting, especially here in the UK, is that underlining philosophy or the way we view the world, or the way we view the two worlds. Nigerian parenting is traditionally, rooted in authority-based. Parent leads, children follows. I think that's kind of the principle that we're brought up with. And I think respect as well plays a very big part in that. And respect is shown through obedience, through tone of voice, the way we speak to our parents, or the way we, children speak to their parents, or to elders, and behavior in general. So love is kind of expressed through structured sacrifices that parents, make for their children, and correction. So that's the way most Nigerian family kind of, view their parenting role. Now, in the Western world, in terms of Western parenting, particularly in the UK, I think parenting is more child-centered. Children are encouraged to express their emotions. They're encouraged to ask questions. and they're encouraged to kind of develop that autonomy, that independence, in their lives, which to an extent almost like contradicts somehow the way Nigerian parenting, or the way we were brought up. And within that, safeguarding kind of plays a big role, because safeguarding frameworks places a strong emphasis on emotional safety, especially in the UK. The choices that our children have,
Hmm.
have. And then one of the things that is always very important as well is the children's voice that needs to be heard,
Hmm.
especially in the UK. So when we talk about tension arises because parents are often, parenting from their memory, from what they know. And that is, it's not just only Africans, it's not just only Nigerians. We parent based on what we know, based on how we were raised, while the children are being shaped by a different world entirely, by British culture, British school, their peer groups, the life and everything that they see on TikTok, on the social media. So the system, that values independence and that emotional expression is almost kind of different from the way Nigerians, see parenting. So sometimes I always say that, behavior that Nigerian parents will probably view as firm or firm discipline may be interpreted as, child or safeguarding concerns by professionals, in the UK, or even they might actually see it as something that is harsh or
Hmm.
unsafe, for children. And I think that sometimes that can, create a lot of pressure, especially in terms of the interpretation, because as parents sometimes we kind of believe that we have to be firm with our children because we don't want them to kind of go the wrong path, and that firmness can be viewed with a different eyes when it comes to, UK parenting. um Another difference is identity.
Hmm.
um Nigerian parenting, I would say, places kind of very strong emphasis on culture, on faith. That plays a big part. I can't, I can't remember any Nigerian family home I've been to there. Faith doesn't really play a big part. And that kind of family reputation as well. What will people say? There's always something about family names, family reputation, and community. Western parenting, on the other side, kind of prioritizes that individuality, self definition, self worth, and just self, ways of doing. I mean, independent way of doing things. And I always, when look at this, it's almost like a big challenge for most parents, because in one way, you are trying to kind of hold onto your values, which is about community, it's about bringing people together, it's about we, and children are trying to actually live their independent life, which is about I. So children kind of fear losing their voice when their
Hmm.
parents are trying to either become firm or exercise their parental role or responsibility as a Nigerian parent. So children fears that, losing their voice. They fear losing their autonomy without deliberate intention to change. So most of the time, both sides kind of feel misunderstood, because everything is still based on fear as well. Because most of the time, the parents fear losing their identity, they fear losing their culture, and when that fear is there, they want to kind of make sure that they tighten up in terms of their strictness. And the more they tighten up, in terms of putting boundaries in place, putting things in place, the more the children, kind of sees that as almost like parents are controlling. Their parents don't understand them. So that kind of creates a lot of, tension within most families' homes. And I think for me, the most important thing is, how do we integrate,
Hmm.
these two ways? Because the solution is not about choosing one culture over the other. It's about integration. Because the way I look at it sometimes is, our children actually should have the best of both worlds, because there are things that in our culture, in terms of our values, there are things that we want to hold dearly, that we want to maintain, and there are some things that we want to let go of as well in terms of our culture. And in this part of the world as well, there are some values that we want to, hold on to, and there are some values that we probably don't really want to. So our children should benefit from the best of both worlds. So we take the positive from our, Nigerian heritage, Nigerian values, and the positive, from the British Western world values, and hopefully put those together to bring up our children. And
Fantastic.
most parents that think that way find it easier.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that detailed and insightful explanation, Chris. I've got another question for you. I think one of the biggest areas of conflict is discipline.
Yeah,
What Nigerians
of
consider
course.
normal, I think you said something about that, but what Nigerian parents consider normal correction may be
Mhm.
viewed differently in the Western system. So,
Of course.
can you explain what acceptable discipline looks like in the UK and what parents should avoid, just to prevent misunderstanding, with safeguarding services and how they should do so that they don't get to the wrong side of the law in diaspora?
Thank you very much for that. I think that's another important question, and a lot of families that I've worked with in the past, have actually they fallen into that trap. I think in my experience, and I'll kind of base a lot of this discussion around my experience. I think the biggest difference still lies in how authority within our culture, discipline, and identity are understood. Looking at Nigerian parenting, Nigerian parenting is traditionally, in that kind of hierarchy, format there, there's daddy there or mommy there, the adult is there. And that respect supposed to kind of cascade down. And then you kind of respect your older brother or you respect your older sister. So that kind of hierarchy is always kind of formal, in our society. And as I said before, it's more like parent led. Parent lead and children follows, kind of a parent led system that we are used to. And respect is always shown through obedience, as I said before. And when we think about it in Western world, in UK, the reality is, when it comes to discipline, what we consider to be discipline sometimes can be viewed as punishment, which is exactly one of the difficulties that most Nigerian kind of falls into. And I think for me, I think the key difference is what we try to actually establish, or what we're trying to, want our children to understand about our parenting. So the issue, as I said, isn't about one particular ways being better than the other. I think it's about being able to understand when we are talking about discipline, what does that really mean, to us? Because discipline is about teaching. It's about passing the message that we want to pass on to our children, you know, so that they'll be able to, they'll be able to actually learn. And when we are not there, they are able to remember what it is that we put in place and act accordingly. Now, it's a very thin line between when we talk about discipline, or what the way most Nigerians parent their children, or what they call discipline, compared to when it becomes, a safeguarding concerns. And that's mainly it's about, the way some of our parents, either discipline their children, and sometimes that does create a lot of tension. And when I mean discipline, sometimes it's about punishment. You know, it's almost like, I'm thinking about a funny case case I dealt with, a couple of months ago, about a family, years ago, about this couple that just came into the UK. You know, very hardworking parents, but as parents, they expect the children to do as told. make sure that they do the study, do their homework even before the parents comes back, but not realizing that not being around does impact on that. Father comes
Mm.
back, mom reports to the father, and is there is coming in to come and put the authority authority in place, and that kind of authoritarian ways of dealing with certain things automatically create is frowned upon in the eyes of the law, because clearly being too harsh or being too heavy-handed becomes a safeguarding consent. And I think that is exactly that's one way there. It's important for parents to actually be very mindful and at the same time understand the system. There's always a lot of rumors and a lot of wrong information. What I always say is it's about knowing the system, understanding the system, and making that effort to be able to understand your children as well. Because
Fantastic.
discipline is often tension. I mean, it's almost, tension will always show up first, and Nigerian parenting, kind of equates that firmness with care. When you are very firm, you are very, strong with your children. We kind of think of that to be, that is how we love our children. That is how we show we love our children. And that can be frowned upon in the UK.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think I'm very sure that most of our Nigerian parents watching will find that very insightful because I mean you and I grew up to experience that back home, but now
Yeah, tell me
yeah,
about it.
experience. I don't think we can we can really
That's one
now
of the biggest challenges, isn't it?
very
Mm,
true, Chris, very true.
yeah,
Now, okay, you see, many Nigerian parents,
yes,
live with that fear of social services.
yep.
What do you think drives that fear? And how can parents really understand the system better so they avoid unnecessary conflict and with the authorities? Because
Yeah.
I mean, once you hear, oh, that lady or that man is a social worker, everybody will be scared. So how can parents alleviate that fear? What can you advise?
Thank you very much for that. I think a lot has to do with understanding and the knowledge of
Hmm.
what that is. And a lot of the fear kind of comes from misinformation as well. So many Nigerian parents, they live in that fear of social services because they are somehow misinformed, because information passes from one person to the other. And most of the time
Chinese
when
whisper.
yeah, exactly. Sometimes when some parents actually go through the system and they are talking about their experience with other families, they're only saying the side of the story that they want the other parents to actually, I mean, other people to believe, because they're not going to say about the thing that they're probably doing wrong. And and over the years as well, there's been that kind of mistrust as well, with the system. And I think it's about being able to recognize that, because when there's misunderstanding somehow, I mean, there's always that kind of experience that is viewed as a punitive system. And I think that is true. It's not just only about Nigerians families, across the board. I mean, back home, authority system often felt, kind of a punitive system rather than supportive. When we see the police, even though they say police are your friend, it's about, we see them as they are coming to actually make life difficult for us. So somehow the fear, I mean, our relationship with authority figure has always been kind of negative somehow. And so most people actually carry that fear into the UK. And if you add that to the community stories, there's a lot of exaggerations. There's a lot of incomplete or misinformation, and parents begin to see social services as a threat rather than a safeguarding system or a support system that is there to help you rather than punishing you.
Hmm.
Um, Another issue is about cultural misunderstanding. Um, Practices that are considered normal in Nigeria household, especially around discipline or communication, can be misunderstood within the UK safeguarding framework, as I've explained before. And that creates a lot of anxiety and even defensiveness, for a lot of parents. But for me, the truth is, social services are not anti-culture. you know,
Mm,
um, I mean, I practiced as a social worker for many years, and a lot of what I used to do is about researching and carrying out cultural assessment of families. Most of the practice they are expected to be child focused. When they intervene, the intervention is based on risk. Any risk that a child is exposed to, are not ethnicity. They're not going to be focusing on ethnicity. I mean, they're not going to be um, intervening because of your ethnicity or your tradition. Most of the time, the focus is about risk. And most of the time, there's that understanding and belief as well that, yeah, we live with risk. We cannot eliminate all the risk in any home. But what are the things that can be put in place? Or what are the actions that can be put in place to minimize the risk as much as possible? And parents that understand that kind of safeguarding language, that safeguarding expectation, they keep communication respectful and they seek support. And I think that's one of the main challenges as well, because if you don't know, there's nothing really wrong in you finding out. And most
mm,
people will be willing to give you that information. But if you don't know and you don't want to accept that you don't know, and you want to kind of exercise what you believe is right, from your own background, you are more likely to be in trouble, or create problem for yourself, because you are bringing up children based on your own values, but your children are exposed to the Western world, so they go to school, and most of the time the children are forced to live different lives. So when they are out there, they're living according to the Western world culture, and when they come home, they are living as Africans, or
mm,
living with the
mm.
expectation at home. So when parents understand how the system works, I think they can parent with confidence instead of anxiety. And they can, based on understanding and information as well, they can actually see the difference between what the social services are there for and what they've initially thought their responsibility are. And it's always very funny, because I work with I gave a speech many years ago in a community, it's African community, and I could not believe the kind of rumor that was going across within that community, that social workers get commission based on how many children they take away, from families, from families. Yes. I said, where did that come from? But somehow that kind of information came out. I think it was kind of the Congolese community, many years ago, you know, and I had to spend a lot of time trying to change their views and trying to get them to understand that, if they don't view risk, then there's not going to be any need, for you to kind of get into trouble, for social workers to come into your home.
Fantastic.
I hope
Thank you
that I
very
hope
much
that
for that
answers the
as well,
question.
Chris.
Yeah, that's okay. Uh,
Actually, just thinking about it now, I mean, I've asked
yeah,
this question before during one-on-one we had, a couple of weekends ago, but I'm going to ask you for the purpose, for the sake of our viewers. You
yeah,
know, you and I realize that children, raised abroad
yeah,
often live between two cultures, which you
of course.
just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. They are Nigerian when they're at home,
Hmm.
but they are Western when they're
Well,
outside, maybe with their friends in school, whatever. How can parents help their children build a strong cultural identity, without confusing, or of getting overwhelmed by
mhm,
that? Because, like you said, it's an identity related issue. But
of course.
parents need to be able to have that knowledge on how
Yeah,
to help their children, not to have dual, to understand that yes, they're Nigerians, but
yeah.
they're in the Western world.
I mean, I think personally, I always believe that it's about keeping it simple, because
Mm,
the, I mean, children that are in the diaspora, they're not. I don't think they're confused about their identity. What they're actually dealing with, they're kind of navigating two worlds, which you've kind of said. And for any child going through that system, sometimes can be actually be difficult. But What they are trying to do is about finding their identity and finding their way, because they are navigating, two worlds. You know, they they are Nigerians at home, as we said, or as we know. And when they go out there, it's about belonging. It's about, being able to fit in. So they kind of act the way the society expect them to act outside. And that is why they are kind of more Western outside. And as I said, it's not just only Nigerians. The Asians went through that experience a lot as well, especially in the 90s, because children kind of live two lives, you know, um, and most of the time they function, because when they're out there, they behave the way they're supposed to behave, the way the Western world expect them to behave. But the moment they get back home, they put all that, by the door, and they're back home, and become what is expected of them, or the kind of behavior that is expected of them, at home. And for me, that constant switching can be exhausting for children,
Mm,
because almost like you are living two lives, all the time. So I think parents help most when they stop forcing a single identity on their children, and find a way to help them to kind of normalize the dual identity that they have, because that is their reality.
mm,
uh, we were brought up, back home. And we can only parent them based on what we know. But now they are here, they're exposed to different world. And for me, culture should be cherished. Culture should be shared, not imposed. And even if we want them to embrace our culture, the reality is our children are more likely to embrace that if it's, kind of shared, in a positive way, not necessarily being imposed or being forced on them. Otherwise they're going to fight back sooner or later.
mm,
And when parents introduce language, faith, values, even traditions, with kind of a warm gesture, to make turn it into fun. I mean, children will become curious, rather than actually experiencing as something that's been, pressured, that's been put in, being imposed on them. And children will build their pride instead of resistance, because if their parents are, they're kind of understanding in terms of the way they introduce it to, to their children. I mean, for example, if your children have not been speaking your language or whatever in the home, and you want them to start doing that, for me, forcing them to kind of, okay, you must learn Igbo now, you must learn Yoruba now, you're just going to actually make them to hate it. But
mm,
if you turn it into fun, kind of, you are speaking it at home gently, little messages in there, and you're kind of creating it making it fun. There's a lot of information on the online as well, that children can enjoy. So if you make it fun, children will always embrace it, because the goal isn't to make children to choose who they are, but to
mm,
help them to kind of integrate in both worlds. And as I said before, our children should be getting the best of both worlds. They should be getting the best of our African heritage. I don't, I'll say that Nigerian heritage, Nigeria is
mhm,
Nigeria,
much
and
better.
Western, values and heritage as well. And for me, we can't go wrong with that.
Mm,
Having the best of
fantastic.
both worlds. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think I'm just going to ask one more question before we go, keep the call line open.
Okay.
Chris,
Yeah.
in diaspora homes, it's
Yeah.
common for one parent to adopt Western parenting style faster than the other.
Of
How
course.
can couples manage these differences without creating conflict that will affect their children?
I think for me that's a very sensitive area to be sometimes, especially for, for young couples trying to find their ways. But
Mm,
the reality is sometimes it's about exposure as well. Maybe one parent might be more exposed in terms of their work, in terms of what they do, to some of the information of how the system is, while the other person might not be as exposed. But This is a very common, experience within families. So when one parent kind of adapts easily to Western parenting style, while the other kind of hold on tightly onto that traditional approach or approaches, the way you want to look at it, the conflicts isn't really about the parenting style. I think for me, it's about fear. It's about fear of losing your identity. It's about that feeling of undermining. And because we can be equal, you know. And if one parent maybe that's kind of understand the system better or whatever, depending on how they communicate, and share this information. But if one person is kind of talking down on the other person or making the other person to kind of feel bad, that's going to generate conflict, because children are mostly affected when their parents kind of contradict each other. But the
Mm,
reality is parents should be singing from the same hymn book, which means it's about communicating. It's about learning from one another as well. And I think for me, the key is for couple to align in terms of whatever they're trying to put together, to instill into their children, to align, privately, have that discussion privately, respect each other's values, and agree on shared principles. Because it's not going to be easy all the time,
mm,
and we're more likely to have more information, better information than the other. But if you know something and you don't share, or you're expecting the other person to know, but without really experiencing what you've experienced, it's probably going to be different for them. So it's about how do you maintain that communication. And there's always going to be that situation that the conflict is always going to arise. There's one Dr. Gottman that kind of talked about, they did a research on couples, and it came up with this kind of four apocalypse, that if it happens in your relationship all the time, that relationship is likely to actually be in trouble most of the time. They call it the four apocalypse. And the first one is about criticisms. They feel that if you criticize someone all the time, or you blame someone all the time, what happens? They become defensive. Um, and when they become defensive, because realize that, then that kind of resentment and that argument is likely to come out from that. And the second one is defensiveness, as well, which as I said. So if I feel blamed, I become defensive. And then the third one, they said, is contempt, which is about you know talking down, or making the other person feel you know better than them, or they don't know enough, or you're blaming them for not catching up on time. And funny enough, they identify that when content is quite high in any relationship, they're kind of talking down, disrespect, or making the other person to feel small. That is actually the highest predictor of relationship breaking down, which is actually very, very important. And then the fourth one is stonewalling, when couples have an argument or have a disagreement, and before you realize, they kind of ignoring each other, until, and whenever, maybe somebody will make a comment, and 2 3 days later they kind of stonewall each other. They don't communicate, and children are seeing all this. So for me, it's about parents working together, because you can't work in isolation. And if you've done so much, I mean, you've come this way so far to live a better life, to create a better living or better life for your children, the most important thing is about enjoying that journey together, going through that learning process together, and sharing that knowledge together. And that will help you, to
fantastic.
achieve whatever you want to achieve. Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Grace.
Yes.
Thank you for laying that foundation. Now it's time to bring in our viewers. The phone lines are now open, and the YouTube chat is open as well. Even though I can see some comments and questions already pouring in on our YouTube, chat.
Okay.
Please, viewers, if you have a question or an experience to share, or something you've always wanted to ask about, in raising family in diaspora, this is your time to do so. Now, To everyone watching, please, you can participate in two ways. One, call in and join us live, or sending your message through the WhatsApp. I will give you access to join us live, and then you can ask our guest your question or give a comment. And then the second one, number two, is dropping your question or comments in the YouTube chat below. Please make your questions respectful and focused on tonight's topic: parenting in the diaspora, discipline, cultural identity, safeguarding, co-parenting, family conflict, or balancing Nigeria and Western values. So I'm going to let our technical team now present the first viewer that wants to ask a question, or if you have any question in queue, then I'm going to read the question out so that our guest can actually take that question. Okay, how do I teach my children Nigerian values when we live in the UK? Chris, over to you.
I think that's I think I probably answered that, as someone in my conversation, but I think that's kind of very straightforward because we all have our values, and those kind of underlining values or negotiable values that we have that we want to pass on to our children. And as I said, it's about how we deliver this, or how we pass, or we try to pass this on to our children. If it's done in a very simple, warmth, not in a very harsh way, the reality is, and you make it fun, your children will embrace it. And when we talk about values, it's about instilling in them something for them to hold on to, because that kind of affect the way they see the world as well. So for me, that when you create kind of how would I call it? I think when you create that learning environment or learning space for them to understand the reason behind what is that you are trying to teach them. Clearly, your children, they're always very curious. They will ask a lot of questions, but it's about making it fun, making sure that whatever it is that you're trying to pass on makes sense. And you're not holding on to that Nigerian mentality of because daddy says so, because I say so. It's about being able to be willing to answer questions, be willing to explain yourself and why this is important to you, because children will ask questions. That's their job. They will push boundaries, they will ask questions, but you have to be willing to answer that. Another thing I know that parents always struggle with is when they don't have the answer. So rather than actually being open and honest that they don't have the answer, they turn it into something else that makes the children to kind of start looking at what's going on with this, with this parent. Because the reality is our children, you are bringing up very smart children. And our children can sometimes be smarter than us. We might not want to accept it, but the reality is sometimes, they are more, more intelligent, than their parents. And we don't want to accept that most of the time as parents. But the best way we can do that is about tapping into their knowledge as well, and being able to understand them, being able to answer their questions, and if you don't know, to be able to be open and honest. But most of the time in Nigerians, we always carry first in everything that we do. We never accept that. We never accept that we can get it wrong sometimes, but we do get it wrong, and sometimes our value will be questioned by our children because they are exposed to different things entirely here. And when that is questioned, I think the best thing is to be able to listen, understand where they're coming from, and at the same time embrace whatever it is that they're trying to understand, and share the information as best as you can.
Fantastic. Okay, do we have another question in our chat? What is the best discipline approach for kids growing up in the West? Wow.
I mean, when you talk about discipline approach, I think I'll probably like to understand that better. But for me, what I always say is, when we understand the word discipline, what does it really mean? This discipline comes from the word disciple. It's about teaching,
Hmm.
um, and so it's about passing the knowledge on. And when we're talking about discipline, it's about how do we don't want situation that we're going to do certain things, or we try to actually put something in place for our children, but when we are no longer there, they do something different. So how do we teach them the right thing to do? So if a child, for example, I'm just trying to use a good example there. If a child possibly did something that is not right at home, it could be anything. The most important thing is the consequences that follow that behavior. But that consequences somehow should have a lesson in it. Part, they need to understand the reason why they did what they did, but at the same time, what is the outcome of that? What when that when that moment kind of ends, what message are they going to get from that? And for me, that's what discipline should actually be about. So if we're able to understand it from that position, then that will going to make a lot of sense. Which means we have to differentiate that from punishment, because punishment, on the other side, is about inflicting pain. You did something that
Hmm.
made me very upset or painful. I'm going to make sure that you get the same pain, or I put something in place that is going to make sure that you suffer this, another a level of discomfort as well. But that can easily turn into retaliation, because if you have a child that have a very strong personality, they will probably get you back at some point, or do certain things, to kind of make sure that they cause you the same pain. So discipline for me, it's about teaching, and it's about making sure that the consistency is there, because there's no point putting some discipline in place right now, um, and then don't follow it through. And consistency as well. So if you're saying these are the expectations that you put on, not a very high expectation, but expectation that is actually expect maybe in terms of how you want certain things to be at home. Now, how do you make sure that you are very consistent across the all through, because your children are going to push their boundaries. That's their job. There's no point putting certain things in place today, but tomorrow you are too busy doing something else, you won't bother to actually look at that, and children won't take that serious, if that makes sense. So I would say discipline is about looking at discipline as teaching, making sure that the children are able to learn from their
Hmm.
mistake as well, and thinking about the consequences that follow the behavior. Because what keeps behavior going is the consequences that follow the behavior. And if there's no consequences, then the children are more likely, to repeat that same negative behavior. I hope that
Fantastic.
answers your question.
I hope so. Thank you very much. We have another question, in the chat. Um, it says, "Hello, I live in Canada, which
Okay.
which is like UK in a Western country. So I'd like to know,
Mhm.
how can I protect my child from peer pressure?"
Well, um, the reality, the way I look at, or the way I normally say to parents is, look at parenting like the armor. Like the warriors in the old, where the olden days warriors, they put this kind of armor around them to kind of stop peers and everything. So look at your parenting and the values and the knowledge and everything that you instill in your child as that armor. And most of the time, that formative years, 0 to 5, are very crucial, because that is when we put all these things in place. Now, the reality is we cannot be with our children everywhere, because the moment they come out of our front door, they're out there, hoping that the armor that we put around them is going to take them through that battleground, to come back home, safely. That's the way I look at it. So, you know, peer group pressure, it's about, we can't control that, but it's about what we instill in our children, to raise their self-confidence, to raise their self-esteem, and to have that healthy relationship with us is what's going to actually give them that confidence to say, yep, I don't mind playing with guys with you, but I have my own, I have my own mind. I don't have to follow you. And it's a difficult challenge for children, but it's about, if a child has that self-confidence, that self-esteem, they are more likely to say no to a lot of temptation and actually try to even be the leader rather than being a follower. Because they're going to be, they want to make friends, they want to belong, they want to fit in, most of the time. you know One of the things I always say as well is, your child is not likely to be fitting, if that makes sense. So it's about, how do you that your relationship is protected, and relationship itself is what's going to help you to be able to actually find a better ground. Yep.
Thank you very much, Chris. But we seem to have a technical glitch at your end as well. So I think you're back. Okay, you're back with us now. Right. I think we have another question. Thank you for your response, but how do I correct my child without the school thinking I am being too harsh? Chris, I hope your network is not dropping.
Sorry, did you say?
Okay, thank you for your response, but how do I correct my child without school thinking I am being too harsh?
For me, it's about, you correcting your child has nothing to do with the school thinking you're too hard. I think for me, it's about understanding. And letting the school, I think for me, it's about communicating with the school as well. And don't forget that the human beings in the school, what the way you are parenting your child might be different from their own value. But as long as there's no abuse, as long as there's no what you yourself we know that's an harsh punishment, I think it's about communicating with the school and letting the school knows your position and why you are doing what it is that you are doing, if that makes sense. And they have a duty as well to make sure that your child is protected. Everybody, professionals around your children, have the guardian responsibility. If they feel anything, they will come. The expectation is to communicate that with you before they pass it on to social services. For me, if you are thinking about how do you discipline your child without the school thinking it's too harsh, I'm sure you can judge that yourself. What does it mean? I mean, what do they mean by saying too harsh? I mean, if you are shouting on the child all in front of everybody or whatever, clearly, and everybody know that is not the right way, to do certain things. So it's about, how do you communicate warmly with your children, and how do you ensure that the value that you're trying to instill in your children, they understand it, because you are delivering it in a warmth format and in a positive way as well. And school, you can actually make it very clear to school as well that this is the reason why you are doing what you are doing. Culture is a big part, but that doesn't mean there's no culture that actually encourages or there's no culture that says that. So it's just about making sure that the school knows your position as well. I hope that helps.
Right. Apologies, viewers. I think we're having some connection problems again with our guest. Your bandwidth seems to be dropping.
Okay.
So I have another question. Are you okay with that?
Okay. All right.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. We can hear you now. You're back. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
That's technology for you. Another question I have here is, my child behaves differently at home and at school. Why is that? Oh, we've actually lost him. Well, there's apologies for this. We actually have huge technical problem today. It started right from the beginning, and I think we might have to actually bring. Okay, let me add him to the stage. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, are you
Sorry.
back with us?
Yeah.
Yes.
Something happened and I was kicked out.
No, it's just the network. I think your bandwidth dropped a little bit.
Okay.
That's fine. The question I read just before your network dropped was, my child behaves differently at home and at school. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a way of surviving. As I said before, they live in two different worlds, and they know that, at home, our parents, have their values, they have a different way of doing things. And for children to kind of fit into the society that we brought them into, and we're exposing them to, they have to find a way to almost like find a way to fit into that system or even live in a different life. And at home, sometimes it's about fitting into whatever that is going on at home. But on the other side as well, when we talk about difficult behavior or challenging behavior, maybe when they're in school they behave very well in school, and when they're at home, they become very difficult. Or now for me, it's about a lot of that has to do with learned behavior. um and when it comes to learned behavior, it's about how you've responded to them in the past. As I said, what keeps some behavior going is the consequences that follow that behavior. So, for example, if your child maybe doesn't want to go to bed at night, all the time, just want to keep watching their TV, and today you say, okay, today you must turn off your TV by 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock came. The child push boundary. Okay, I will allow you to stay only 20 more minutes. 8:30 is still there. You allow the child will go to bed. You know, but from 8 o'clock is push it to 8:20. So tomorrow, what is the child going to do? From 8 o'clock again, he will try his luck. Keep pushing. Maybe the following day again, maybe you are busy doing other things again. He pushes till 8:30 before he finally go to bed. So you can see gradually that behavior can continue to actually extend. But it's not going to do that in school because the boundary is clear. 1 o'clock is 1 o'clock. 15 minutes break is 15 minutes break. No extension. No, everybody has to. So that consistency allows students to kind of fit in and do as they expected. If a child is neurodivergent or has additional needs, that is different, because if it's organic, it's the same behavior that you see at home that you're going to see in school. But if that behavior is different, most likely is a learned behavior, and it's about that, and whatever that is learned can be unlearned, if that makes sense. So if your child is behaving differently at home, it's about looking at, okay, and if it's a school that you like the behavior that is happening, speak to the school. What are they doing different that you are not doing at home, and find a way of replicating that. If you don't
Fantastic.
know,
Thank you very
let's
much, Chris. I think we are just going to take only one more question because of this technical glitch we are experiencing today, which we are, awfully sorry about. Let me read one more question to you from the.
Okay.
Yeah. So can we have another question?
Okay,
How
I can
do I
see
reduce
something there.
screen time without constant fights? I
I think
think I
that's
can
one part
relate
of
to
that.
that.
Depending on the age of the child, because one of the
Right.
things that we try to do, what I always say is, if you in a home, yeah, a lot of things that we need to try and actually emulate is about having a structure in the house, because if children knows what to expect, it makes life a bit easier. For example, that in order for you to catch 8 o'clock train, you need to leave the house by 7:30. So knowing that helps you to kind of work towards that. And that goes for children as well. When you know what to expect, or when you know whatever rules and regulation that we have in the home, if it's there and it's constant, the reality is that will be, that will be supported. When screen time, it depends on how much children or your child has been almost addicted to it, because if something that's been going on for so long and you've allowed it to kind of extend to a stage that it becomes a battle, and it's about trying to find a way of winning it back gradually, rather than just one day you came in, took the phone, and boom, and chuck it away. So it's about getting the child to actually understand, having some boundaries in place, what needs to happen before screen time, what time do you act for screen time. If it's an older child, there can be a contract. So we do this first before we do that next. Screen time is agreed to screen time maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes after homework. So does help. And about making sure that is consistent across the board as well. I remember many years ago when I'm trying to stop my son from in terms of the amount of time spent on the game, but I think the question about Dad, you're always in front of your computer as well. So it's about getting the balance right as well. Getting the balance right as well there. Okay. Screen time, there has to be rules and regulations. Something that you can manage. But what I always say is, if you cannot enforce it, if you cannot be sure that you can be consistent with it, it might be safer not to even say it at all, because that's likely to make things worse. And snatching the screen from them doesn't really resolve. You're just going to have a child that's just going to resent you, and I keep talking about relationship as well. When your relationship is good with your child, they're more likely to do what you want them to do. They're more likely to listen to you. Because most of the time, what I always say, your child is not the problem. You are not the problem. The problem is the relationship. So that relationship is what is problematic. And if you're able to find out what is it that is causing that problem in that relationship, you are more likely to get it right.
Thank you very much for that,
I hope that
Chris.
answers that question.
Yes,
Yeah.
very well. We are just going to take the
You're
last
welcome.
question. Can we have the last question on the screen? My kids don't speak my language anymore. What can I do? I've tried my best, but they show no interest.
Well, I suppose kind of have they have their own identity that they've already started forming. But when you say they don't speak your language anymore, I'm assuming that they came into the country, they were speaking the language, and gradually that was actually dropping off. Now the question is, how did it get to that stage in the first place? But trying to reintroduce the children to your language, it's not because they don't speak it. The question is, how often is it said in the house as well? And most children, they can understand, and whatever you're actually saying to them. But how do you introduce it in a fun way? Because they don't see it as something that is mandatory for them. But how do you introduce it in a fun way? Rather than actually imposing it and actually forcing them to do it, making it fun, the way you communicate with them as well, speaking your language to them, at home, in a fun way, rather than actually, speaking English all the time as well, Bayo, just saying it to them in their language and making it fun, for them at home. For me, that is one of the ways you can encourage it, and you'll be surprised that they are learning, they are listening, but they won't say it to you. And like my own children, they don't speak language all the time, because I'm Yoruba, my wife is Igbo. But the reality is, when they start listening to all these musicians, they are picking a lot of those information, things that I thought, oh, how did you even understand what they're saying? Because when they're interested, they're going to learn it. But most of the time, you have to make it fun as well. Not doing any advert, but I know there's a lot of all these books and YouTube channels that kind of teaches children your language, depending on which language. I know of Yoruba, Igbo,
Hausa.
I haven't seen the one for Hausa, but I've seen the one for Yoruba, I've seen the one for Igbo. And teaching your children, almost like a Cartoon Network, and they enjoy it. They'll be laughing. And while they're learning, they're having fun. So if we can make it fun, they are more likely, to learn it. But as I said, as I get older, others. You don't.
Wow, it's really tough tonight. Anyway, apologies again, Chris. We are losing you again.
Have you lost? Oh,
okay.
I think maybe it's saying time for us to round up.
You just, I was just about to say that. Well done, very much. Thank you so much, Chris. Tonight has been powerful, insightful, and actually deeply needed. To every parent watching, remember, your children are growing up in 2 worlds. Your job is not to choose one for them, but to help them thrive in both. As we enter Christmas, let this season be a moment of reconnect, to reconcile, to rebuild trust, and to create new memories as a family. Before we close tonight, I would like to take a moment to formally acknowledge and appreciate 2 very important institutions. We are deeply honored to have received official endorsement and partnership support from the Nigerian High Commission in the United Kingdom and the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, NCCP. Their support is a strong affirmation of the work we are doing through NACAID and the Nigerian Community Chronicle podcast live stream to strengthen Nigerian families, communities, and engagement across the diaspora. We sincerely thank the Nigerian High Commission UK and NCCP for believing in this vision and for standing with Nigerian diaspora. To our global viewers, thank you for being part of tonight's NCCP Christmas bonus episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe so we can reach more Nigerians across the diaspora. From all of us at NCCP Live, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a prosperous New Year's ahead. I am your host, Otumba Anthony Oluwafemi Kolade. Good night and God bless. Mr. Chris,
thank you very much.
Thank you as well.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to be here. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.